when starting with a personal training client, we always do assessments. Now, what do those assessments, you know, mean? Like what is included? You have some sort of medical history um, questionnaire, a PAR-Q questionnaire, a lifestyle questionnaire, and then you move on to some sort of body composition, either taking skin fold with the fat calipers or the handheld body fat readers, the bioelectrical impedance analysis, which I am against because they are not accurate. Goals, expectations, when it comes to fitness, possibly ongoing personal training, but also maybe now a cardio test, like a step test, strength test, maybe some push-ups or squatting, and a range of motion flexibility, like the sit and reach. Those are your standard parts of an assessment. Now, you could take it another level and add something like the overhead squat assessment. I have issues with the overhead squat assessment only because can it tell us some issues with the individual? Yes. If they're excessively leaning forward, if their arms can't reach overhead, knees caving, hips misaligned, there's a lot of things that we can see, right? But however, like we don't know physically what their skeleton is. So using those as pretty much the basis of your programming could be troublesome. Not to mention, an individual who can't get their hands and shoulders back during an overhead squat may not have shoulder issues. It may be a thoracic spine issue. But you won't know that because you're not testing for that. So there is some issues with the overhead squat assessment that could fundamentally be misinterpreted and used. I don't want to say incorrectly, because anything physical activity after that is going to be good, but it won't be optimal for that individual. Then there's also the functional movement screens, which are a little bit more in depth, and you get a score. However, more studies have coming out that they don't really tell us anything. They really don't. They're not a good predictor of injury, during activity. So you can't use it for that. So if you deal with athletes, that's not the greatest thing to use. But also, if you're dealing with the average everyday person, a functional movement screen is going to be crap because they're usually sitting all day or standing all day or sitting in a car, sitting on a couch, so all of that stuff is going to be garbage. They're going to have a really poor score with that. Now there's other options. There's the assessments that we do. When our assessments, basically, we use posture and we use an AI to kind of read that posture for us. But we use it as a reference guide only. It's not the be-all, end-all. It's like, oh, your shoulders are forward. That means we have to work on all of this. Oh, your hips are rotated. One hip is rotated outward. So now we have to focus on bringing that back. Not necessarily. Basically, what that means and what we see and what the information that we get and the angles that we get are reference points. Things to look at as we move forward when we're exercising. That we will retest in 12 weeks, and if any of that changed, then hey, guess what? Yes, that's exactly what we needed to do. But if it doesn't change, you didn't fail as a trainer. It just wasn't part of the programming. It wasn't necessary. Because we don't know, like going back to what I said before, we don't know the skeletal structure of somebody, inside. Like we can't see that. So we don't know if this is normal for them. And I'm sorry, but we're not going to be able to adjust the skeletal structure. It's just not going to happen. It's not a definitive resource, is basically what I'm saying. But we use it as a reference guide so we could program exercises that may be a little bit more efficient and optimal. I keep saying that, but that's exactly what this is. based on these reference points. And if things change with that, great. And if they don't, okay, you are now stronger in that setup, right? Outside of posture, we're also going to be using movement analysis. I like to use movements under load. Reason being is normal, average, everyday motion is what these clients have. So they're going to get up and down off a toilet. They're going to get up and down off a chair. There's no load involved. So their body structure, and they're going to mimic those movements like they do every day. We need to change that. We need to challenge that. And again, I'm not talking about throwing a 400-pound back squat onto them. I'm talking about giving them a 10-pound dumbbell and hold it as a goblet squat and show me a squat, show me a sit down. You get to see changes right then and there because the body's an amazing machine, and the neural and motor adaptations that they have immediately will show us more than just doing a series of 10 bodyweight squats, and then we're trying to look and observe and trying to find those little minute changes. It's under load where the real stress is involved, where the body will now force its compensation in order to allow you to move freely. Let me say that again. Only under load will it force the body to show its compensations in order for you to move freely. I'll give you an example. I saw a client training at a gym doing walking lunges. Only the right leg, the right knee caved in. Holding dumbbells. Not very heavy dumbbells, but enough, because it was a long distance walk, was enough to cause an adaptation, to cause a change. Now that client can do walking lunges without a problem, without any weight. So if we use that solely as our assessment, we're not going to see actually what happens. So when load was added to the exercise, the right knee caved in. So now that's something to look for, and the trainer has to now adapt the exercise to make a little bit more optimal and more efficient movements. So like I said, we essentially force the body to adapt really quickly by adding a small load, nothing crazy. Whether it's a chest press, bench press, even a push-up is load because it's the body weight against gravity. That's something that every person should be able to do. And then pull up or a lat pull down exercise. We get to see shoulder motions. We get to see, if the shoulder blades are activating at the same time, if the lat muscles are pulling, if it's more bicep, or, believe it or not, more shoulder involved. So all those little things we get to see while under load. Those assessments are what are going to show us a little bit more than your standard just body weight, movement, walking lunge, bodyweight squat, or standing like a standing static posture, where someone's just going to look, okay, now turn to the left, but that's it. We go one step further with the standing postures because we use an AI to give us angles and to give us pretty much degrees of asymmetry. And that's a little bit more accurate, a little bit more important, because then we could use those as reference points later on. With those reference points, like I said, we get to test that later on and see what works and what doesn't. So your assessments, should have all the medical history and all that stuff because you need to know who you're dealing with. But there's one component missing from your standard your standard training assessment that I have not heard most trainers do, and I've been in this business for close to 30 years, is the simple question of, how are you feeling today? How was your day? Are you stressed? Are you upset? Are you sad? Things like that. You don't say it like that because it sounds condescending. That's my dog running around. And because if you saw my posture video, posture biomechanics and corrective exercise, posture can be affected by your emotions. So if you show up to your first personal training meeting and you're upset or you're sad or stressed, your posture may show that, and your trainer now may take that and go, okay, rounded shoulders, forward neck, you know, the spine curve is off. We need to fix all this stuff. Meanwhile, a week later, they don't have that issue, and now you're wasting time and you're wasting exercises. Nothing was done efficiently and optimally. My two favorite words. So, add into every assessment, how do you feel? How do you feel today? You know, what's your emotional state? Because we need to know this because it does affect the body. Assessments, they should be done all the time. And then the bigger ones, like the ones we do, should be done roughly every 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the client. But your standard assessment should be done every 3 to 6 months. So they're very important, and no trainer should ever overlook that. And if you're a client listening to this and your trainer hasn't done an assessment in a year, say something. And if they say, oh, you don't need it, find a new trainer. Because you should be checked all the time. It's our job to do so. Assessments, very important.